And with that said, go ahead and get started. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Maricela. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Lanza. I'm the Senior Director for Grants and Federal Programs. And we are going to share with you today some information about ESSER, and in particular, the ESSER3 grant. Just maybe to get started with this, the ESSER3 grant is part of the stimulus grants and the stimulus funding that's come from the federal government over the last year in response to COVID. One unique thing with this is that ESSER3 has some requirements for input from the community, from stakeholder groups. So this meeting today, we want to be able to gather ideas from you and essentially needs, that you're aware of in schools and, with students and staff. And so we want to be able to gather some of that. We've done one of these with the staff already. We're going to do another one with the community, parents as well. So this is part of that process. And again, as we're going through this, if you have, questions or ideas that you'd like to propose, go to just start taking down some notes, I suggest, and we're going to open it up after about 10 minutes of giving background. And we want to spend the majority of today gathering your questions and your information. Okay, so just as an overview, you can see there on your screen, there are actually three different ESSER grants, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. Each one of these is tied to a federal stimulus bill that was passed. And then in turn, money was given to the states and the school districts to use in response to COVID. And really at this point, I'm gonna wash my hands. At this point, it is in kind of recovery from COVID. Now, in each one of these grants, there are certain regulations, and each one of these grants is a federal grant. So it's similar to our Title I grants and other federal funding that we have. There's actually a grant application that we have to fill out. And then as we use this money, we have to make revisions to that. We have to track where the money's going, how it's being used, and really detail every part of the grant. So each one of these has a grant built behind it, and each one of these has certain really rules and policies that we have to follow there. One second. ESSER 1 is $18.5 million. We received this almost exactly a year ago, last summer. That first installment of message after the tone. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. And so ESSER 1 is essentially at this point, everything has been purchased, reimbursements have been started. So the money from ESSER 1 has already hit our schools. It was used for things like our PPE response, where we were needing to get masks and gloves, a lot of the sanitation in the schools. It was also used to retain a lot of our staff. Our staff across the district, there were bus drivers and food service folks that were really in the middle of COVID. There was I guess a threat, or they could have been laid off. We could have had to downsize, but this money allowed us to keep them employed and keep them whole as we went through COVID. ESSER 2 is the grant right now that we are actually functioning in. ESSER 2, we received that in the spring, $76.3 million. I failed to mention the dates on to the right of each one of those amounts. That is the end of the grant cycle. So we have really a full 2 more years for ESSER 2. Each principal put together proposals for their. At this point, are in the middle of budgets and how they're going to spend this money in the schools. Departments across our district also provided proposals, and they right now have money allocated to them. And these were approved at the beginning of June. There was a list of items that were approved by the governing board. So ESSER 2 is active. Right now, we're in the middle of this money going into the schools, funding positions, and really we're at a point where items now are going to start being funded out of this. In red there at the bottom, ESSER 3. This is where we need your input. So this last round of federal stimulus provided $172.9 million to our district. We have until September 2024 to use this money. And the two parts I highlighted there, there are requirements if we have meaningful consultation with stakeholders. So that is you. We want to be able to get your feedback of how you see needs in the district, maybe how this money can meet them. Is the money eligible to meet some of those needs? Again, there are requirements for what it can be used for. And then also we have to build a plan. So we have to build and make public a plan of how the funds are going to be used and really how that's going to be rolled out within our schools. So here's a little background on our requirements. So you can see just kind of the red, I just highlighted, some of the main pieces for ESSER 3. We're required to have meaningful consultation with groups. 20% of the funds for ESSER 3 we have to set them aside to address learning loss. And so in doing that, one of the other requirements, it has to be evidence-based interventions. So there are some very specific things with tutoring, summer school, the use of interventionists. So those are the sort of things that the funding, 20% of the funding has to be directed towards. Also addressing academic impact of lost instructional time. That's where summer school came in. And, that was very specific to trying to get kids caught back up academically. You can also see the middle bullet there, respond to academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs. One of the big items that we have continued to try to fill with this money is the need for additional counselors, additional social workers, additional staff for the MTSS process in our school. These are things that we know are important. We never have enough funding to make them whole in the schools. And this is where we're trying to use some of the ESSER dollars to really have that deep impact in the schools and in meeting those social emotional needs that our students have. And then next bullet down there, the highlighted in red, vulnerable student populations. These are actually subgroups through the state for state letter grades and then for school improvement. The terms that they use are subgroups. There are certain subgroups in each school that the state has identified being in need of increasing academic performance. So this is what that bullet's talking to, that they want the ESSER 3 dollars to be able to directly impact subgroups, specific subgroups in schools. And then continue with prevention and mitigation strategies, obviously the health and safety aspect, social distancing, being able to provide health and safety measures at the school. It might be, centered around spreading kids out for social distancing. It could involve obviously hand sanitizer and things like that, the cleaning that our custodians do in the schools, to continue that. And then the last item there is a plan that we have to develop from this. It needs to be available on the first day of school. And then we have to update this through the life of the grant every 6 months, just give an update and any changes in that plan. So we summarized a lot of the eligible requirements into these 7 areas. So these 7 areas are the areas that our staff in the schools, we've gotten feedback from them. Our principals have designed proposals and budgets around these 7 areas. And this is, again, kind of just trying to summarize to keep the conversation and where we're trying to direct the money. These 7 areas were kind of the main ones that popped out for eligible areas in ESSER 3. The first one, academic loss. Second, educational technology, mental health and support, or also refer to that in schools as social emotional learning. Recruitment and retention, that primarily is focused on staff. And that is something that we've seen already. The governing board has provided stipends, 3 different types of stipends over the last, really the last 6 months here. Those are aimed at retention, personal protective equipment, PPE, distance learning. Maybe it's a little bit of connection for everybody. You've seen and heard about the new virtual academy, online learning in our district. That's this right here, distance learning, providing that option for families. And then minimizing transmission, again, PPE, and then some of the health and safety measures that we're able to take in schools. So this slide right here, we will reference at the end, and this is where we want to get your feedback in these 7 areas. What are your ideas around ways that we could use money in these 7 areas? Just real quickly, again, just another data point here. In surveying the staff, these were the 4 main areas that they brought up as an area that they felt was important: academic loss, technology, social emotional, and retention. We had over 800 staff members respond to this, and the numbers in the parentheses were mentions or suggestions that fell into those categories. So this lined up very closely with principals as they put together their plans and worked with their site councils and leadership team. These areas lined up real closely with what principals also presented as their proposals. Okay, so and then speaking of the principals, each school, they put together a plan for each of their schools, and here were kind of the big areas that came out from their plans: intervention, curriculum service providers, so staff that works with professional development, teacher support, multi-tiered systems of support, so MTSS practices in the school, counselors, social workers, social emotional programming in the school, supplemental curriculum, enrichment specialists and teachers, outdoor learning spaces, and then additional school furniture and equipment. This was actually one of the challenges principals faced in coming back, was the social distancing and how to rearrange school to meet those safety protocols. So that's a summary of the school's requests that came in. This is an example of our menu items that we were able to pull from all the schools and compile, I guess is the correct word, from all the schools. As schools turned in proposals, we went through and identified what items were eligible. And so this is just a quick snapshot. There are actually like 400 items on this list, but this is just kind of starting with the A's, kind of giving an example of what principals were asking for. So you can see, maybe I'll use that first line as an example: active panels or Promethean boards. So this is educational technology in the classroom. And so if you follow that top line across, you can see the number 67. That is the number of schools.
John, I think we lost you. Renee, do you want to hop in?
Sure. I believe we were nearing the end of the
You
presentation.
guys hear me still?
Oh, there he goes.
Yeah, we lost you for a minute, but if you were
Am I
talking
back?
about, you're back now, so go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, that was my best part right there. Okay, so this is an example of.
This is an example of the items that were included in all the proposals that we took to the governing board. You're back, John.
I'm back again. Sorry about that. All right, this is the last slide here. This slide is again a summary of those 7 areas, and this is where we want your feedback. You know, in these 7 areas, what are your ideas? What are needs that you know are out there that we can address with these 7 areas? And I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I'll leave this slide up, and I think Leslie, were you going to kind of open it up for feedback?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, John. So really, we are looking for you guys to share your ideas. You know, since it's a small group, you can either raise your hand or put your name in the chat, and then you know, share away. We're going to capture. I'm recording this so we can capture them all. Or if you want to put, if there's additional things you want to just put note in the chat, I will make sure those are copied over as well. So Margaret, I see your hand up. If you'd like to start, that'd be perfect.
Sure, thank you, Leslie. Well, one thing I noticed about this particular list, the PPE and the minimizing transmission seems a bit redundant. I mean, not that it's not important, it's certainly the most important, but why were those 2 broken up into 2 separate things, I guess is my question.
Sure, I'll kind of answer that. The minimizing transmission, I maybe didn't explain that one as well. That is a lot of the cleaning that happens in the schools, the custodial cleaning supplies. We actually, there was early on in COVID, there was a lot of emphasis on deep cleaning. And so that was, there was additional equipment that was purchased there. So that was more like the cleaning supplies and pieces. And then the PPE was obviously The mask and gloves were the two big things that came out of that. And so it's interesting, these each have kind of developed a little differently as COVID's developed, right? Over the pandemic, it was initially a lot of the touch and the surfaces that the guidance was coming out on, that then obviously went into more of the airborne direction as COVID developed. So that's the difference between those two areas.
Okay, so can I ask a follow-up question, or does somebody else want to jump in?
No, go ahead, Margaret.
So when it comes to that, have we hired enough custodians? Does anybody know?
That has been a request.
Somebody's saying no.
I know there's been we have had requests from schools. They've built it into plans for additional custodial staff. And so, yeah, that definitely is a need that the schools have brought up, of just being able to get additional custodial staff. I think the hiring, this is more of on the HR side, but I think that's been a little bit of a challenge, just enough of them to hire, but that is a request from schools.
Well,
So
we have a lot of custodians that are quitting. I mean, needless to say, I've been filling in as a custodian for the last 2 weeks. And, you know, our schools are bare of custodians. I mean, let's face it. I mean, I'm at Soling Tom per se right now. I just came home to Zoom real quick, but I've been at Sechrist, I've been at Dunham, and I've been at Marshall over the last 2 weeks. So needless to say, the custodian shortage is definitely out there.
Okay, great.
So with that in mind, you know, and I'm all for, you know, mental health support, and all of these things are of course the things that we want, but we tend to focus solely on students. Is there a way to get at least the mental health, social emotional portion of things directed at our employees as well? Because they have suffered too.
Okay, good. I'm noting that down as a suggestion there. Any more detail on that? I think, was that Margaret?
Yeah.
Like just examples maybe of.
Well, I mean, throughout the pandemic and really even afterwards, I think that the aftermath of the pandemic is harder on people, because all throughout the closures and so forth, you know, people are huddled in their homes and they're, you know, going through whatever they're going through. Afterwards, now that everybody's back and we're all under this sort of guise that everything is normal when it's really not. There is also that, I forgot what it's called in psychological terms, but there is that trauma, if you will, after that aftermath of having lost people, lost colleagues, lost loved ones. Relationships are different. People have left. People are doing additional duties that they don't normally do. And it is very, very taxing on them. And so, you know, I'm just wondering if there is a way to build that into the lives of our employees, as we are trying to build that into the lives of our students. So for instance, if I were principal of a school, God forbid that ever happened, but if I were principal of a school, I would want my students to have a time period somewhere in the week where they could have like a circle, a restorative circle, to talk about what they've gone through. But employees don't have that. And I don't know, to be honest with you, when they could do it other than after work, maybe during a Wednesday PLC or PD, but just once a month at least, whereby people could, you know, express their issues and their sorrows, and maybe even come up with some creative changes within the sites that might help. You know, if we do have to close down again, or if we do have to face the loss of our loved ones even more.
Okay.
Because one of the things that I've noticed, or that I talked to a doctor about, is that people who were in the process of getting treated for cancer, for instance, when the hospitals were only accepting COVID patients or people with COVID symptoms, they were turning away people with cancer issues or cancer treatment because it was not considered essential treatment, which I'm just dumbfounded by. But that's what they were doing, which means that if you have that kind of an issue, it's only going to get worse. And so by the time you come back right now, for instance, it may have spread. And now our employees or their loved ones are dealing with that. And so they're going to go into this next year with that issue. And it's going to be really hard on a lot of people.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Margaret. Art, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. You know, I think both to Cindy's point and to Margaret's point, you know, from my perspective in the conversations I've had this past year, you know, staff are at their, you know, the end of their ropes, you know, in many ways after what they've been through, what they've dealt with. And so, you know, I do think it's going to be really important in this next year to take a deep look at, you know, what are, you know, how can we recruit and retain, you know, those employees who have been through so much of this, and making sure we're putting, you know, a fair amount of those dollars towards those efforts, because, you know, between COVID, between, you know, everything that's gone on, you know, even the legislative bills that are putting new challenges in front of educators, you know, this next year, people have had it. And so I do think it's going to be something that we're going to have to put some really deep thought into, and hopefully some of these dollars can help, you know, retain staff and, you know, recruit and find janitors for, you know, for our schools and all of those positions, because I think we are in that tough spot. But obviously beyond that, you know, the mental health and social emotional learning, you know, we didn't have enough of that before COVID, and, you know, especially needing it now. And so that's not a surprise. That's one I've heard a lot having conversations with educators. And then, you know, the other thing, I think you touched on it a little bit, and it came out in the surveys, but hearing a lot about the minimizing transmission and figuring out outdoor learning spaces and having to reimagine the spaces at school. I know that is something the folks I've talked to, educators I've talked to, are really excited about, right? About, you know, how do we, how can I have a productive classroom outside when we need to? Because we're in a different environment now, and having kids in the classroom for 4 hours, 5 hours a day, that it may not work, but our schools may not be equipped for that. And so shaded areas and stuff that can move outside, and those outdoor learning spaces, I think, were something, at least in my conversations, people were really excited to think about. How do we do more of that in our schools? Frankly, that budgets were never able to really accommodate before, and hopefully now it'll help both minimize transmission and create those spaces. And then, you know, I think this one is really known, but the technology gap within our schools, I think that's going to be an ongoing thing. So those are really the four pieces that, when I look at this list, I know I've heard the most about.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question, Art? When you talk about outdoor learning spaces, are there specific things that teachers or the educators really think that need to be a part of that?
You know, I think the biggest thing that I've heard is, I guess the two things, and one is kind of a learning space, but one is mostly like shade, right? Like we're in a place that's really hot, and so
Right.
making sure we can, you know, shade areas, even create areas with trees and, you know, other places that will be, you know, conducive to learning. And so I think that's a big thing. You know, I think I could imagine things like, you know, they have those evaporative coolers that can kind of be wheeled around, you know, outside, that sort of thing. Tables or chairs or even like lap desks that could be used. Those are some of the things I heard. And then also, and this isn't necessarily for as much as learning spaces, but, you know, good space with shade for kids to eat outside, right? And not having to have everybody in a big lunchroom. And I know a lot of schools just don't really have the ability to do that. So I would say those are probably the two things I've heard most. But I think if we dig into that a little bit more, we will get those specifics from teachers and staff. So
Great, thank you. I just hadn't heard, so I was my own curiosity.
yeah.
Great. Other comments from anyone? Margaret, I know you still have your hand up. I wasn't sure if you had more.
Oh, sorry. I actually, there's a couple of other things. And that is when it comes to training for all our employees. I know that, teachers obviously get trained, but our ESPs are going to need some training. If we're going to give them added duties, they're going to need added training. That I think that might help with the recruit or the retention portion of things quite a bit.
Great. Yeah, Cindy.
Oops. Needless to say, after working at 4 different schools with custodial, I know our custodial definitely need training. I mean, per se, I mean, they're not given enough training, enough supplies. I mean, there's shortages of supplies going on. Vacuum cleaners that are, I don't even know how old they are. Oh my gosh. But needless to say, training, equipment, for our custodial staff. I mean, and this is why we're losing custodians. I mean, $13 an hour, and these custodians are busting their butt for it. So, I mean, anything that can be done for our custodial staff is much appreciated.
Okay. Margaret, you raised your hand again.
Yeah, sorry, I do have a question. When it comes to the ESSER2 funding, has that already been allocated and spent? And if not, because I'm just thinking, I know some of the proposals may have included custodians and the like. Is that being looked at and compared to what we're looking at from this list?
Yes, so the proposals from the school went off of these same categories. And so that was all ESSER2, and right now the schools are finalizing their budgets. So a lot of these things you're mentioning, outdoor learning spaces, majority of the schools have something in there for that. Additional seating, you mentioned tables and things like that. Those are all in there. Some do have additional custodial services. There are definitely cleaning things in there. And we tried to allow the schools to have some autonomy in what their needs were, so that some definitely do need, just more seating versus others that don't. So, that's at the school site right now that we have a lot of these items that you're talking about coming together.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments? Now's your time to share. No?
I have one other question. Sorry.
No,
I feel
please.
like I'm taking up all the time here.
Totally
when
fine.
it comes to ed technology, I know that we did our best to give out as many laptops as we have students, which is admirable and wonderful. But I'm just wondering as to the durability of that technology, the warranties, all that kind of stuff, because I'm hearing horror stories about laptops getting thrown and keys missing or whatever, because kids are kids. How is that investment being guarded, I guess? Or how will it be? I mean, does this include the insurance that would cover all that technology? Or if it gets broken, would the funding cover insurance or warranties, that kind of stuff?
So if the question is, would it be compliant with the funding? Yes. And I think as far as the projects and the purchases that have already been made, those types of issues, I don't think we were prepared to discuss here. We're kind of just looking at more of the direction or other areas that maybe we haven't focused on so far, to include into the new plan for the ESSER 3 money. So I mean, the plan for technology, I think, has been laid out. You know, Blaine has presented that. And so those things were taken into account. And as far as replacement repair, all of that has already been included in what he has done so far. So if there's anything else we need to look at adding, then we would love to hear about those things.
And I'm not an elementary principal, obviously, but I would maybe think about adding more lights at the elementary schools for evening performances or gatherings and that sort of thing, because if we're going to hold more things outside, it seems like sometimes it might be better to hold them in the evening rather than during the day, so that you get better attendance. But you also, if you have more attendance, then you have more people. So you want to hold them outside, which means you need lighting of some sort. You know, in addition to those shade structures during the day for PE classes or cafeterias or, you know, what have you. It seems like that would be something that would be, that we could look into.
Great. Any other thoughts? Okay. Great. Maricela, where would you like to go from here with the meeting, since it sounds like everybody's kind of provided their thoughts?
I really just want to thank everybody for jumping on this meeting. I think it's really important. I know when I first saw the list that was put together, it seemed to mirror a lot of what I heard all year long about what people wanted and were worried about, and what I heard from employees or being on the forums, that parents. So I think it's very comprehensive of everything we've been hearing. So I just want to applaud the entire process. It's been incredibly clean and transparent. And I want to thank everyone involved and the employee groups. You fielded so many of these, and I'm sure you saw a lot of them. The concerns or questions you heard throughout the year represented here. So it seems to be very reflective of what's been said in the past. I want to thank everybody. To the employee groups, don't be sad, because you're going to see Leslie again on Thursday morning at 8:30. She is going to lead us through some of the discussions regarding our re-entry plan. You know, what you're going to have questions from your members as to, you know, little things like in-person stuff, meetings, things like that. And Leslie's going to talk us through it on Thursday morning. So together again.
Yes. And so in the meantime, and Cindy, I saw you raise your hand. So one sec. We also have an ESSER page that we've put on the district website. It will have more information that gets put up on it over time, as well as it currently has the recording from the employee ESSER meeting. And I don't know that we'll put this one up there, but when the public ones that happen on Thursday night, those will also go on that page. If anyone wants to review them, you are more than welcome. And then Cindy, did you have a question?
Yeah. Yes, we have mandatory CPI training out west Thursday and Friday morning from 6 o'clock till 2 o'clock. So most of my division will be there at the meeting. So I don't know who I have to send to this for Thursday morning.
We're gonna, once we get the presentation, we can forward it to you.
Okay, sounds great. Like I said, this is mandatory CPI training that going into the school year. So actually I'm driving the bus from East at 4:30 in the morning. Thank you, so that we can be out there by 6.
Wow, okay, wow.
Yay.
Really early. Yeah, no, we'll send you a copy of the presentation.
And thank you so much. I